They told me my son died on a Tuesday morning. It was raining that day, hard, ugly rain. The kind that turns hospital windows into blurry gray sheets. I sat in the hallway outside labor and delivery, fists clenched, heart in my throat, waiting for someone to say anything. Claire never screamed. That's what I remember most. There were no wails, no sobs, just the dull sound of monitors and nurses moving too fast. Then a doctor with tired eyes told me our son had been stillborn. Umbilical complication. No one's fault. These things sometimes happen. They let me see her afterward. She looked pale. Quiet. The baby was already gone. No body, no tiny hand to hold. Claire said she didn't want me to see him that way. I nodded. I trusted her. I loved her. We never had a funeral. She said it would make things worse. We never got a death certificate. She said the hospital handled everything. We never spoke about it again. I boxed up the nursery. I packed away the little clothes, the crib, the books. And the bear, the small brown teddy with the blue ribbon, the one we picked out together at a shop in Sedona the day we found out she was pregnant. She said it looked like me. I laughed and named it Charlie. That bear was gone too. Claire said she donated everything. I believed her. Life after that was quiet. We stayed together, but not really. She started taking photography classes, left town often for weekend retreats. I buried myself in work. Our love became like old wallpaper, faded, unpeeled at the edges, but too stubborn to remove. I didn't think about the bear again. Not until 5 years later. I was walking back from a hardware store on a Sunday afternoon, carrying sandpaper and paint samples, when I passed a coffee shop patio. And saw him. A boy. No more than 5. Brown eyes, same cleft in the chin as mine, same twist in the hairline above the right temple. He was laughing. Holding a teddy bear. My bear. Charlie. My legs stopped working. The woman with him had her back turned, blonde ponytail, sunglasses, coffee in hand. She bent over to pick up a dropped spoon. When she turned. It wasn't Claire. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart pounding like I'd been dropped into combat. That boy looked exactly like me. And he was holding the bear that should have been buried with my son. I stood there on the sidewalk too long. The sun behind me, the shadows in front. My brain scrambled for reasons, logical ones, anything to explain away what I was seeing. But logic is quiet when instinct screams. The boy had my eyes. Not just the color, the shape, the weight behind them. A kind of shyness I remembered from childhood photos. He clutched the bear close to his chest like it mattered, like it was familiar, like I had once held it. I took a step back. Then another. They hadn't seen me. The boy was busy lining up sugar packets on the table. The woman, not Claire, scrolled her phone, half watching him, half somewhere else. A nanny, maybe. An aunt. I didn't know. I left before I could make a scene. My hands shook for an hour. I sat in my truck, keys untouched, breathing like I'd just sprinted a mile. I wasn't ready for what I felt. Hope wasn't supposed to hurt that bad. At home, I pulled out the old photos. I hadn't looked at them in years, the ultrasound printout, the baby shower pictures, the nursery we painted soft green. There it was again, the bear. In her lap. In the corner of the crib. In every shot Claire posted before the silence. I called the hospital. Told them I needed a copy of my son's birth and death certificates for insurance purposes. A lie, but close enough to truth. They found no death certificate. No burial record. No cremation authorization. No file with the medical examiner. Nothing. Just a record of a live birth, for approximately 41 minutes. After that, discharged. No follow-up. No documentation of demise. The silence rang in my ears like gunfire. That night, I opened the folder of bills Claire had once shoved into a drawer marked, medical. She always said the insurance covered everything. That we didn't owe. That it was, handled. But there were gaps. Dates didn't match. Pages missing. I remembered her strange urgency back then, how quickly she'd moved on, how she'd insisted I let go. I'd blamed it on grief. I'd told myself she needed space. That she was trying to heal. But now, space felt like a weapon. And healing like a lie. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Not yet. I needed more. I needed clarity, not just suspicion. Grief makes people see ghosts. I had to know this wasn't just a haunted face in a crowd. I called a friend of mine, a former Marine who now worked private security. I asked if he still did personal lookups. He said yes. No questions asked. I gave him Claire's maiden name, her sister's address, the name of the photography studio she once mentioned working with. I also gave him the only thing that really mattered, the date my son was supposedly born, and the date she said he died. He told me he'd get back to me in a few days. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the garage with the lights off, holding the only thing I'd kept from that time, a baby sock. One sock. Faded blue, soft as memory. And I whispered a name I hadn't spoken in 5 years. Then I asked the dark a question I already knew the answer to. 3 days later, I got the call. My friend didn't waste time with small talk. His voice was low, steady, like it always was when something wasn't right. He said the name. The one I hadn't dared say aloud for 5 years. There was a birth certificate. There was a medical record. And there was no record of death. The child was alive. Registered. Named. Not my last name. Not Claire's. But a new one. Invented. False. She had signed the forms herself, 2 days after I was discharged from the hospital and sent home with a grief pamphlet and a nurse's apology. She listed herself as a single parent. The father's name was left blank. I didn't ask my friend how he found all this. I didn't care. All I could hear was the weight of 5 years crashing down on top of me like steel beams snapping in sequence. The boy in the cafe. The bear. The exact shade of his hair when sunlight hit it. He wasn't dead. He was stolen. The next few days moved in slow motion. My body functioned. I ate. I answered emails. I shaved. I nodded at coworkers and laughed at things I didn't hear. But my mind stayed frozen in that moment on the sidewalk, staring at a child who didn't know I existed. Every quiet moment was filled with what-ifs. What if I hadn't walked that way? What if I hadn't looked up? What if I'd never known? The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the missed time. First steps. First words. Fevers. Bedtime stories. Tears after nightmares. All of it, gone. Not lost. Taken. I reopened the box I'd sealed 5 years earlier. The baby clothes, the ultrasound photo, the green paint swatches from the nursery. And the note Claire had left, written in shaky cursive on hospital stationery. He was too perfect to stay. I'm so sorry. I can't talk about it right now. I read that line 20 times. Too perfect to stay. The words were careful. Deliberate. Not a lie, exactly. But not the truth, either. Claire hadn't broken down at the hospital. She hadn't cried. She'd seemed distant, clinical. At the time I thought it was shock. I'd made excuses. People grieve differently. Maybe she couldn't process it the way I did. But now I understood. It wasn't grief. It was guilt. She never let me see his body. Never let me hold him. Never allowed me to sign a death certificate, plan a burial, say goodbye. Because there was no goodbye to be had. She had taken our son and rewritten the story. Edited me out of the frame. She had turned a father into a stranger. A name on a file never filled in. The anger came slowly. It didn't roar. It didn't flare. It settled in my bones like cold iron. That night, I looked through legal forums. I started reading about parental fraud, hidden paternity, custody rights. The words blurred, the jargon thick. But one sentence kept returning like a pulse. Knowingly concealing a living child from the legal father may constitute civil and criminal action. I bookmarked the page. Then I pulled up an old folder on my computer labeled Nursery Plans. Inside were photos of the room we never finished. In one of them, Claire was holding the bear. I zoomed in. It was the same one the boy carried in the cafe. That was all I needed. I renamed the folder, Case File. And for the first time since the sidewalk, I smiled, not with joy, but with something far stronger. Purpose. Building a case wasn't like war, it was slower, more surgical. There was no adrenaline, no charge, no shouting orders into the wind. It was forms. Photocopies. Proof. It was waiting on hold with county clerks and rereading old insurance statements. It was patience sharpened into a weapon. I hired a lawyer. A quiet woman with steel gray eyes who asked the right questions and never once looked at me with pity. She told me I wasn't crazy. That what Claire did wasn't just immoral, it was potentially criminal. She also told me not to contact Claire. Not yet. This would be handled right. I gathered every document. The medical records. The photo of the child. The hospital's statement of live birth. The signed forms with her name alone. The lack of any death certificate. The note she'd left me. The bear, photographed, printed, cross-referenced. Everything. My lawyer filed the motion in family court. It started as a paternity action. A request for a test. Legally neutral, sterile in tone, powerful in substance. The system wasn't built for revenge. It was built for restoration. I didn't want to punish Claire. I wanted my son. And he was mine. The court granted the motion to compel testing. It would require Claire's cooperation, or a subpoena. My lawyer warned me that it could be drawn out, that Claire might fight it, deny it, disappear. But once the petition was filed, the machinery was in motion. She would have to respond. I spent the next week preparing for war inside a courtroom that valued detail over fury. At night, I imagined the boy's voice. I'd never heard it. I imagined how he laughed, how he said, "Dad," if he'd ever said it to anyone. I wondered what name he'd been told. What version of me he'd been given, if any. One evening, I parked near the same cafe. Not to approach, just to see. And he was there. Different clothes. Same bear. Same chin. The woman with him was different this time. Not the blonde. Someone older, maybe early 50s. Claire's mother. An aunt. He ran toward the street chasing a cup that had blown off the table. The woman called out, panicked, rushed after him. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. My body wanted to move, to shout. But I stayed. This wasn't the moment. It had to happen the right way. That night, I printed a new set of photos. I updated the file. I took a long look at the final page, the one that now held a scan of the court's approval for DNA testing. I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because, for the first time in 5 years, I could feel something real rising beneath the surface. It wasn't hope. It was reclamation. The kind that comes not from punishment, but from finally being seen. My lawyer contacted Claire's. The papers were delivered. And the silence that followed felt different this time. Not distance. Dread. Claire responded through her attorney. There was no denial. No fight. Just a short, cold statement agreeing to comply with the court order for paternity testing. She requested that all communication be handled through legal channels and asked for privacy, during a difficult time. Her silence wasn't defense. It was strategy. The kind used by people who think disappearing equals erasure. The appointment was scheduled. A plain clinic in a strip mall, tucked between a nail salon and a frozen yogurt place. The kind of place you'd never look twice at. I arrived early. Sat in my truck, hands clenched on the steering wheel, staring at the entrance like it might open by itself and release everything I'd lost. When they arrived, I didn't move. She stepped out of the passenger side of a black SUV. Older. Thinner than I remembered. Wearing sunglasses, even though the day was overcast. The boy walked beside her, holding her hand loosely. He looked bored. Or confused. The bear dangled from his other hand, its ribbon fraying. I watched him disappear through the doors. 10 minutes later, it was my turn. The nurse didn't look me in the eye. Routine swab. Quick. Clean. No words exchanged. I was in and out in under 5 minutes. But I stayed in the parking lot for another hour, staring at the smear of clouds above the roofline. They said it would take a week. 7 days. I used the time to prepare. I wrote a statement for the court. Not legal, personal. I explained who I was, what had happened, and what I wanted, not revenge, not punishment, just to be a father to the boy who never got the chance to know me. I kept it short. Honest. Grounded. I gathered photos of the nursery we built, the baby clothes we never used, the letters I'd written during deployment. I attached receipts, email trails, anything that showed I'd been there, even in absence. A father who had never left. Only been erased. When the test results arrived, they came in a sealed envelope from the lab, hand-delivered to my attorney's office. She called. Asked if I wanted to open it in private or together. I told her I already knew. Still, I came in. Sat across from her as she broke the seal. She read it silently. Then slid it across the table. I didn't touch it. I just looked at the words printed in black. Probability of paternity, 99.9997%. Everything after that moved fast. A supplemental motion was filed to amend the birth certificate. To establish legal paternity. To seek shared custody and visitation rights. The court agreed to hear it on an emergency basis, given the concealment and the established deception. Claire's lawyer requested mediation. An attempt to minimize disruption. A quiet settlement. They wanted no press. No attention. I declined. This wasn't about noise. It was about truth. And the truth didn't need volume, it needed recognition. The judge set a hearing date. And as I left the courthouse, the weight of 5 years began to shift. Not lift, not yet, but move. Like the slow cracking of frozen earth before a thaw. My son existed. He had a name. And now, I had a voice in his world. Soon, he would know mine. The courtroom was almost empty. No audience. No reporters. Just a judge, 2 attorneys, a bailiff, and the last fragments of a lie that had survived 5 years too long. Claire sat at her table, head down, flipping through nothing. Her hair covered half her face, and her hands trembled faintly, just enough for me to notice. I didn't look at her long. I wasn't there for her anymore. The judge opened the hearing with a voice like gravel, slow, bored, procedural. But even he paused after reviewing the documents. The results. The timeline. The testimony my attorney submitted, typed and signed by hand. Claire didn't speak. Her lawyer spoke on her behalf, phrases like regretful misunderstanding, emotional instability following labor, and not malicious, but protective. The words floated around the courtroom like stale air. I submitted the letter I wrote to the court. I didn't read it aloud. It didn't need performance. The judge read it quietly. A few times, his eyes flicked upward, toward me. When he finished, he folded it neatly and set it aside. What followed was simple. The court restored my name as the child's legal father. It amended the birth certificate. Granted shared custody, structured, gradual, supervised to begin. It ordered therapy for the child and both parents. And it left room for modification, as trust could be rebuilt. There was no celebration. No feeling of victory. Just a stillness. Like standing in the shell of a burned-out house. After the hearing, Claire approached me for the first time in over a year. She didn't speak. She simply looked at me, and behind the exhaustion in her face, I saw something hollow. Not sorrow. Not remorse. Fear. I nodded once. Not in forgiveness, but acknowledgement. She stepped back. A week later, I was allowed one supervised visit with my son. It took place at a neutral visitation center, colorful walls, plastic furniture, cameras in every corner. He arrived with a counselor. The bear was with him again, held under one arm like armor. He didn't recognize me, of course. Why would he? I introduced myself slowly. Not as Dad, not yet, but as a friend. Someone who knew his name, his favorite animal, his birthday. Someone who'd brought a small box filled with dinosaurs, picture books, and a tiny t-shirt with a rocket ship on the front, the same print his nursery once had. He played quietly. Focused. Watched me from the side of his eyes. I didn't press. I didn't reach. Halfway through, he asked why I knew his bear's name. I told him it was because I'd picked it out a long time ago, before he was born. He looked at me for a long moment. Then nodded. That was all. The first visit ended with a wave, tentative, cautious. But not afraid. The counselor told me later that he'd asked if I was the man from the drawing, the one his mother had hidden in a drawer. She meant a photo. Probably one Claire forgot to throw away. Maybe one from our nursery. One of the few things she hadn't managed to erase. I returned home that night and stood in what used to be his room. The walls were still painted that soft green. The mobile was gone, the crib long packed away. But the corner still held that emptiness, the shape of a child who was always meant to be there. I placed the old bear on the shelf. Not as a reminder of loss. But as a placeholder for what was finally coming back. The second visit went easier. There was no counselor this time, just a woman from the agency sitting quietly at a nearby desk, flipping through paperwork. My son, walked into the room carrying a drawing. A crayon rocket ship with two stick figures inside. One small, one tall. Both smiling. He handed it to me without a word. That afternoon, we read books. Lined up toy cars in perfect rows. Ate pretzels from a shared bowl. He let me tie his shoelace when it came undone. It was something no one else in the room would remember, but I would. Weeks passed. Then months. The visits moved from supervised to structured. From structured to flexible. Eventually, to overnight. The first time he slept in my home, I sat outside his door for hours, listening to the slow rhythm of his breath. I hadn't heard it since the day he was born. The sound was different now, older, stronger, but it was real. Present. Alive. Claire no longer reached out. Her silence became permanent, the kind that felt more like defeat than peace. Her visitation schedule narrowed. She didn't protest when I requested more time, longer weekends, summer breaks. There was no custody battle because there was nothing left to fight for. She'd already surrendered what mattered. Still, I didn't speak ill of her to him. The truth would reveal itself in time. It always does. One day, he found the sock. The little blue one I had kept in a drawer all these years. He asked if it was his. I said yes. He looked at it like it was a relic, something from another life. Then he handed it back and said it was too small for him now. He was right. So much of what I held on to no longer fit, the grief, the anger, the questions. They had served their purpose. But they didn't belong in the life we were building now. We created new routines. Saturday pancakes. Sunday movie nights. Quiet drives where he'd name every car he saw, guessing who would win in a race. I taught him how to ride a bike. He taught me how to breathe again. I kept the bear on his bed. He never questioned it. He tucked it in beside him like it had always been there. And maybe, in some way, it had. On the 1-year anniversary of the court order, I framed the paternity result and placed it in a drawer, not as proof, but as a marker. A reminder that some truths are worth chasing no matter how long they've been buried. I never got the first 5 years. The baby steps. The scraped knees. The early words. But I have the rest. The middle. The becoming. Not long ago, he called me Dad without hesitation. Not prompted. Not rehearsed. Just, natural. I nodded. Didn't cry. Just wrapped my arm around his shoulders and let the word settle into the room like it had always belonged there. Because it did. Now, the nursery isn't a memorial. It's a bedroom filled with laughter, plastic dinosaurs, and books stacked in uneven towers. The old bear still sits on the shelf. Not as a symbol of loss anymore. But as a witness to the return.